don't like going home. And I know I can't possibly be the only one. I wouldn't say I've ever really experienced anything directed towards me in regards to not wanting to go home. There's definitely been people who didn't understand it, which totally understandable because everyone's experiences are different. Everyone's situation's different. But I feel like it could still be normalized a little bit more. I feel like there's still such a strong societal pressure to go home once you've left, especially around the holidays, because there's a strong emphasis of family around the holidays. And if you're someone that likes to go home frequently, that's fantastic, and I'm so happy for you. But this video is for the people who are like me, who don't like to go home, just for them to know that they're not bad people, they are not lesser than, and there's nothing wrong with them for having those feelings. The last time I went home was back in 2021. I had planned a 2-week trip with 1 week being at home, and then the second week I would go see my best friend for our annual trip together. If there was one thing I could say about that trip, it is thank God I listened to my gut, and I planned it so that I would go home first and then see my best friend second, rather than vice versa, which I did consider. Mentally and emotionally, it was what I needed. Within the first hour of my best friend picking me up from the airport, we were sitting in her bedroom and I just had a complete meltdown. I broke down completely from stress, frustration, and disappointment. I remember she told me that I looked exhausted and that she could tell I just needed to decompress. But it didn't actually hit me how much of a toll it takes on me mentally, emotionally, physically, until I got home from those 2 weeks and I was back home with Nico and we had a hard conversation. Maybe this will sound weird to some people. Maybe you might even understand what I'm talking about, but I had kind of accepted it as like the normal process for me going home. The stress, the internal distress that I felt, like that was just normal to me. What really opened my eyes and made me understand that I had to accept how stressful it was for me to go home was, and I got notes for this one, was when Nico told me, every time you go home, you come back and I have to pick up the pieces and put you back together. Until he had said that, I didn't realize that me going home also affected him. I just kind of took it as I'm the one going home, I'm the one going through these emotions, it just affects me. I never asked, but I always did wonder if my husband, Nico, and my best friend, if they like talked about me when I was on that trip. Like, did they compare notes or something about how stressed I was, how exhausted I was emotionally, mentally? And I mean, I really don't care if they did. It was just the fact how similar their responses were that it always made me wonder if they did have like a talk. If anything, the fact that they had such similar responses really just showed me how seriously I needed to take this into consideration, how hard it was on me to go home and how it was affecting the people that cared about me, my best friend and my husband. I'm going to do a little backtracking and tell you about my childhood to show that these feelings of not wanting to go home, it's not new. They've been there my entire life. It wasn't until that trip from 2021 that I really understood it. Ironically, it's also spring break right now, which kind of fits in with the story. But basically, growing up, I never liked school breaks. I dreaded them. The only time I ever really looked forward to school breaks was like when that semester started, because it was just a way to get myself through schoolwork mentally. Like, oh, just gotta do 2 more tests and a project, and then we'll have a break from school. But as soon as it was like a week or 2 before the break, I was dreading it. I didn't want a break from school per se. I wanted a break from schoolwork, if that makes sense. But I would see my classmates get so excited about the upcoming break, and it made me feel like I had to be excited. It made me feel like I had to be visibly excited the way they were. On the flip side, that also made me feel even worse because on the inside, I was nowhere near excited as them. I did not look forward to the break. I didn't want it to be a school break. So, of course, fueled by hormones, puberty, I felt like I had a growing list of things that were wrong with me that made me so different from all my peers, and I felt kind of bad about it. Hating school breaks carried its way all the way through college, and it wasn't until like maybe my 2nd or 3rd year of college where I actually like pinpointed, oh, I don't like breaks because I don't like going home. So I didn't really dig much deeper than that. I was just now aware, like, I don't like going home. I'm sure there's some sort of psychological explanation for it, but basically, I realized when I was going home, I would become a version of myself, an old version of myself that I didn't like. I felt like I had no control in my life. I felt like I had no drive. I felt like I had no will to live. I know that sounds dramatic, but basically, I just felt like a shell of a person. I moved to the back seat in hopes that my camera would stop overheating. Since that 2021 visit back home, I have had to accept that going home is something I need to do very, very sparingly, at least until I have a better hold on my reactions, my emotions, until my environment and the people I'm around don't trigger me into my old self. Until I have better control of all that, I think it's just better for me to keep my distance, unfortunately. Hopefully one day I can get to a point where if I were to visit home, it won't be so exhausting for me. I've mentioned in previous videos, I'm from North Carolina and I love my state. I love North Carolina. I love my friends that are there. I love the area. But something else I've had to accept that I didn't really realize was there before, and I don't know if it really has anything to do with me not wanting to go home, but North Carolina doesn't even feel like my home anymore. It's been kind of a weird thing to wrap my head around, to be honest. My city has changed so much in just the past few years, like just since graduation. I almost don't even recognize it anymore. The surrounding areas have evolved so much. It's gotten very busy, and I love that for the area. But it's made me realize that it's no longer home for me. It's not my home anymore. I'm not saying I would never visit my home state again, but I do think it's going to take some time. I need to be smart about it. I need to recognize who I can and cannot see to keep my peace. And I need to make sure I have my support system in place. Since recognizing that I no longer view North Carolina as home, there is a quote that has stood out to me, and it is so cheesy, but it's the quote, "Home is where the heart is." And I feel like that's just the best way to describe my acknowledgement that North Carolina is no longer my home. My definition of home now is wherever Nico and my cats are. It's kind of weird, but I sort of feel like I went through a breakup. When I realized North Carolina was no longer my home, there was just this sadness of like everything I knew growing up, everything I thought was always going to be there. It's no longer my sense of home anymore. That familiarity is barely there. That familiarity is not enough for me to consider it home. But at the same time, it's also exciting because now I get to create the sense of home for the current version of myself with the family that I've chosen for myself.